Somewhere in a locked room in a hospital for the criminally insane, a man spent 9 years painting a picture you could hold in your 2 hands. He had all the time in the world. He was never getting out. His name was Richard Dadd. And before we go any further, you should know what he had done, because everything in this painting grows out of it. Once, Richard Dadd had been one of the most promising young painters in England, trained at the Royal Academy, spoken of as a future master. Then, on a long journey through the Middle East, something in his mind began to come loose. He started to believe he was being watched, chosen, commanded. By the time he came home, the brilliant young artist was gone, and in his place was a man who heard the voice of an Egyptian god. In 1843, that voice told him his father was an impostor, a demon wearing his father's stolen face. So Dad took his father for a walk in a country park one evening and killed him, believing he was carrying out a sacred command from the god Osiris himself. He was caught, declared insane, and locked away for the rest of his life, first in the asylum called Bethlehem, the place that gave us the word Bedlam, and later in Broadmoor. And there, surrounded by other men the world had chosen to forget, in a stone building where the days had no edges and nothing ever changed, Richard Dadd began to paint, not screaming visions, not darkness. He painted this a tiny, teeming, impossibly delicate fairy world, no bigger than an open book, crammed with dozens of little figures frozen in the middle of some secret ceremony. Imagine the patience of it, bent over a surface barely larger than a serving tray, day after day, year after year. Layering paint so fine that some of these figures are smaller than your fingernail. 9 years in a locked room, shrinking the entire world down to something he could control one brushstroke at a time. He called it the fairy feller's master stroke. And for 9 years, he vanished into it. Now most people glance at this painting and see only chaos, a pretty cluttered fairy scene. But Dad did nothing by accident. Every figure here was placed. Every face is turned a particular way. And once you start to look, really look, you begin to notice that this crowd is not random at all. It is arranged, it is watching something. And some of the watchers, it seems, may be people Dad could never leave behind. So let us do the one thing this painting begs you to do, and almost no one does. Let us look closely. Start at the center, because that is where your eye is pulled anyway. There he stands, the fairy feller himself, the woodcutter, back turned to us, axe lifted high over a single standing nut poised to split it in one perfect stroke, the master stroke of the title. But notice what is happening to that stroke. It is not falling, it never falls. The axe is raised, the muscles are tense, the whole crowd leans in to watch, and the blow simply hangs there in the air. Forever. Every other figure is caught mid-breath, waiting for a blade that will never come down. Dad built an entire world around a single action, and then refused for 9 years to let that action complete. Hold that thought, because it is the key to everything hidden here, and we are going to come back to it at the very end, when it means something far darker than it does right now. For the moment, lift your eyes, away from the axe, up, toward the top of the painting where the light barely reaches and the leaves grow thick. Because there is someone standing up there, and he should not be easy to miss, but he is. There, at the very top of the painting, half lost among the leaves and the crowd, stands a man. You could look at this painting 100 times and never find him. He does not draw attention to himself. He simply stands near the top edge, slightly apart from everyone else, and in his hands he holds a pestle and mortar, the tool of a chemist, the tool of an apothecary. Richard Dadd's father, Robert, was a chemist. Sit with that for a moment. The son who took his father's life, and painting years later from inside an asylum. A small and careful figure holding the exact instrument of his father's trade, placing him at the very top of the scene, above everyone. watching over the whole strange gathering, quiet and unmoving and easy to miss. We cannot ask Dad what he meant by it. He never explained. And those who study the painting are careful to call this a reading, not a fact, a shape in the paint that happens to look like a memory. It may be nothing, a coincidence of costume and tool. But once you have seen it, it is very hard to unsee. Now come down, all the way down to the front of the crowd, and to see this, you have to lean in so close your breath would fog the glass. Among the little people pressed close to watch the feller swing near the front, there is a smaller figure, a child closer to us than the rest, and some who have studied this painting have wondered about that child's hands, whether there is something on the fingers. A faint stain, a darkness that does not quite belong. Some have wondered whether this small figure is Dad himself, the boy he used to be before the God, before the voices, before the walk in the park that ended everything. A child placed at the front of the crowd with something dark on his hands, watching the blow that will not fall. Again, we cannot know. It is another shape in the paint, another reading, another thing Dad never explained and never confirmed, and took with him to his grave. But notice what is beginning to happen as we look. The painting is starting to feel less like a fairy tale, and more like a room full of people who all seem to know something, because they are everywhere once you see them. Look at the faces in the crowd, really look, and you find they are not the soft, pretty faces of a children's story. They are strange, sharp. Some are staring. Some are hidden almost entirely behind blades of grass, so that only an eye or a mouth shows through. Dad painted the grass tall and thin and close together, like the bars of a cage, and behind those bars faces peer out, watching. A man kept behind bars, painting a world where everyone is behind bars. There is the patriarch at the center, not the real father hidden in the leaves, but a fairy judge. An old white-bearded figure, cold and towering in an impossibly tall crown, presiding over the ceremony. There are the fairy royalty, Oberon and Titania, tiny and cold and regal. There are soldiers, dwarves, dandies, ladies, and entire society frozen in a single held breath. And every one of them is turned toward the same thing. The axe, the stroke, the blow that never lands. It is as if Dad gathered everyone, the father he killed, the child he had been, the whole watching world, and brought them all into one small room, and arranged them around a single frozen moment, and then sealed them inside it. And here is what makes it truly unsettling. He did not paint this in a burst of madness. This is not a wild, chaotic scream of a picture. It is the opposite. It is controlled, meticulous, painted with a steadiness that took 9 patient years. Whatever this painting is, Dad knew exactly what he was doing. He built it slowly, deliberately, detail by detail, fully in command of every brushstroke, which raises the question we have been circling this whole time. If a man sane enough to paint like this spent 9 years building a world around a blow that never falls, then why? Why hold that axe in the air for 9 years? Why refuse so carefully, so deliberately to ever let it come down? Here is the answer, and it is not hidden in any single figure. It was hiding the whole time in the one thing we noticed first, and then looked past. The blow that never falls. Think about what Richard Dad had done. In a single moment, one swing, one act, one stroke, he had ended his own father's life. And that moment could never be taken back. There was no undoing it, no repainting it, no 9th year in which the blade rose back up and his father stood and breathed again. In the real world, the stroke had fallen. It had fallen and it had cost him everything. But here on this small panel in this locked room, Richard Dad found the one thing the world would never give him. He found a way to stop the blow, Look at it again and you will feel it differently now. The fairy feller, axe raised over the nut, muscles locked, the whole world leaning in. Everyone waiting, and the stroke frozen, held one breath before it lands. Not finished, not fallen, still somehow preventable. For 9 years, Richard Dad lived inside the single second before a fatal blow, and he did everything in his power to keep that second from ending. He painted every leaf, every petal, every strand of grass in obsessive, microscopic detail, not because the painting needed it, because the work could not be allowed to finish, because the moment the last brushstroke dried, the blow would have to fall. And as long as he was still painting, still adding one more blade of grass, one more tiny face, the axe stayed up. The stroke never landed. Nothing was final. This was never a painting of a fairy woodcutter. It was a man building a machine to stop time, a place where the worst thing he ever did was always about to happen, and never had, where his father up at the top still watched, where the child he used to be still stood at the front, innocent enough to be saved, where everything that could not be undone simply paused and waited and never arrived. That is the confession hidden in this painting, not in the pestle, not in the stained hands, not in any single figure you can circle and name. The confession is the whole thing, the entire frozen world, and the 9 years he spent refusing to let it end. He was not painting a memory. He was trying to outrun one. And here is the final proof, the detail that makes it almost unbearable. Dad never actually finished this painting. Look at the corners, and you will find bare, unpainted canvas, places the master never closed. And on the back, he wrote the title with one strange word added: Quasi. Almost as if a quasi-masterstroke, as though even he could not bring himself to call it complete, because to complete it was to let the blade fall. He left the axe up. He handed the unfinished panel to a hospital steward and walked away from it, the masterstroke still hanging in the air. He lived another 22 years. He grew old inside those walls and died there, quietly, an old man almost no one remembered. But somewhere in a museum in London, that axe is still raised. The crowd is still leaning in. The father still watches from the leaves. The child still waits at the front. And the masterstroke, the one that already fell once in a park at dusk and could never be called back, still hangs there in the painted air, one breath before it lands. Forever.